Okay, so I'm going to do a quick revision of the rest of urbanisation with you. So we're going to do our case study of urban renewal, urban redevelopment, our new town, and urban growth in developing cities like Kolkata and how it affects them. So very quickly, urban renewal is when you move residents out of a rundown area, rundown apartment block or housing. You relocate them temporarily to another accommodation, you do up the housing for them and you move them back in, no community disruption. So our case study of urban renewal was Killarney Court in Killarney Street in Dublin, inner city. Okay, so the problems initially with it beforehand were Killarney Court is just, I suppose, north of the River Liffey, near O'Connell Street. You know O'Connell Street, the main street in Dublin, so it's just very close, or just off of O'Connell Street. 4-storey apartment block built around a central courtyard. This should all be coming back to you. What were the problems? So the apartments were very small, inadequate for the needs of the families. No insulation, very, very cold and damp in the winter. Mould on the walls. Stairwells were damp and dirty and dark. No lifts for the elderly, so very hard for them to negotiate the stairs. Some of the apartments were boarded up and abandoned and became derelict, so not very inviting, would probably lead to crime. There was a lot of unemployment and a lot of poverty in the region. Okay, so the solutions, they decided to do it up during the Celtic Tiger years. So what they did was they kept the shell of the old building, made it look the same as when they, as their old house. They enclosed courtyard, they closed it in. Okay, so the courtyard, they kept it more private, keeping a sense of security for the residents. They reduced the number of apartments from 138 to 106. That way they could build bigger apartments. And they updated the fittings and modernised them and everything. So light switches and ovens and appliances and the whole lot was all done up, showers, etc. Okay, they installed lifts, so that was ideal for the elderly. They even included sheltered accommodation, so for any elderly people that wanted to live in these homes in the sheltered accommodation but have carers and people coming in to support them during the day, so it was very elderly friendly. They also built a community centre for the people in Killarney Court, so that was a way of getting more community spirit around, getting them to know one another. Mother and baby centre was built, so great support for the local mothers, and shops. So that's brilliant because they put services into the people living in Killarney Court. They all encouraged a sense of community. So I hope that's okay, that revision of Killarney Court. That was our case study of urban renewal. Okay, our case study of urban redevelopment, and a quick reminder, urban redevelopment is when you have a derelict rundown part of the city, and if there's any people living in it, you move them out, or whatever was there, and you demolish it, you demolish the building, or you demolish the apartment block, and you rehouse them somewhere else, and you do it up brand new. So our case study of urban redevelopment is Grand Canal Dock in Dublin. Okay, so the Grand Canal Dock in Dublin. Now, we know that the Grand Canal Dock is quite old. It was built back in the 18th century. It was built basically when the canal was in use. The industries used to get their stuff delivered via boats along the canal. That's not in use anymore nowadays because the ships are too big to negotiate the canal, so the canal is of absolutely no use. And the warehouses therefore are shut down because the factories can't locate there. So it's just not in use anymore. So a lot of those warehouses became derelict and boarded up and run down. So they started to do it up in the year 2000. So they started to redevelop it. So it's not industrial use anymore. They kind of changed it to more services. So some of the original buildings remain, but they built a lot of new buildings. Okay, so basically you've got Google headquarters, you've got financial service offices. It's even, part of it is even known as Silicon Docks because there's so many world famous companies with their headquarters and their offices there, Yahoo and Facebook and Google and all of them, Twitter. Okay, so they put in a lot of new buildings and moved those global companies inside there. To house a lot of the workers for those big global companies and the office workers, they did build some apartment blocks, so that's ideal. Boland's Mill is currently being redeveloped. So it was an old mill where they used to make the flour and store the flour and all that, but that's not being used anymore. So they basically, I think Google bought it up and they're basically doing it up. They bought it for 170 million. There's going to be new offices, more workers, more apartments, more cafes. They're just making it a really, really nice area to live in. They've great transport coming into the Grand Canal Dock, so when they redeveloped it, they did a really good job. So the Dart line is coming in and the Lewis as well. Okay, so they did a great job of it. Right, yes, our case study of a new town is Tala, even though I know you mightn't consider it as a new town, but it is relatively new. So Tala is a new town in Dublin City and the outskirts of it. I suppose, what do we need to know? Before it became a new town, it was just a village in the 1960s, surrounded by farmland. It started to get really built up and more populated in the 1970s. They started to move people actually from the inner city out there, and that did cause community disruption to those people, but they moved them out there to houses out in Tala. Today it has a population of over 71,000 people. I suppose initially the problems before they started to do it up and make it a new town was the housing densities were very low. A lot of people didn't drive, they had a long walk to the bus stop. A lot of services weren't there, very, very few shops, public transport wasn't existent, lots of unemployment. So when they did do it up as a new town, they really, really developed it well. So it's a really, really good new town. So they have a massive shopping centre, the square. So that's a great service for the locals. They've got a big regional hospital serving the medical needs of people. They've got the Lewis extends out as far as there, and that can bring you into the city as well. They've got industrial estates attracting work. They've got the Institute of Technology for third level students. They've got the basketball arena. They've got the GAA clubs. They've got Shamrock Rovers Stadium there. They have 2 theatres for cultural hobbies for people. So they have basically really, really turned it into a really nice new town for the people to relocate from the city centre out to Tala. So 71,000 people roughly is the population. Okay, hope that's all right. Okay, this is the last thing now we need to do. So urbanisation is fine in our cities in Europe because we've wealth and we can do them up and we can build nice buildings and everyone generally has the same standard of living. When urbanisation, which is the growth of a city, happens in a developing world, in a poor country, not everybody is wealthy. You've some wealthy, you've some poor. Okay, so the spread of cities in a poor region isn't necessarily a good thing. So Kolkata is our example. So Calcutta or Kolkata in India. There's a lot of sharp social and economic inequalities, so a lot of wealth and a lot of poverty. The wealth there, the CBD, very nicely built up, a great central business district, lots of shopping, lots of business activity, air-conditioned hotels, lovely restaurants. Park Street is a fine shopping street area where they shop in. Meter taxis used by the wealthy people. They have a big market where the people do their shopping in the evening when it's cooler. The wealthy locals attend the turf club race course. If you're very, very rich, you can join the sporting clubs, the golf clubs. They've got deadly nightlife for the people who can afford to visit them. So if you're wealthy there, you're living a great life. If you're poor, you're living in horrific circumstances. You're living in the poorer squalor of the suburbs, narrow streets, very small homes, low-rise, 3 generations of a family living under one roof, multi-storey apartment blocks, people crammed into them, squatter settlements if you're extremely poor, if you're not lucky enough to live in the apartment blocks, shanty towns basically. Lots of people migrating in from the rural areas because they're fleeing famine and poverty. So they're living in these shanty towns. They're dangerous because they're built in the side of railways and they've got no services or water, toilets or any showers or anything like that. They're bathing in the rivers, very unhygienic. Lots of health problems because of the lack of hygiene there. So these shanty towns in Kolkata are called busties. That could come up as a short question. Any of the heavy labour is done by the very poor people. So rickshaw workers, you'd be the poorest of the poor, basically carting people around. You're pulling heavy loads in those carts, very, very hard physical labour. Other of the poorer workers would be working in labour and construction. If you're extremely poor, probably the homeless people sift through rubbish and find anything that they can recycle and make money out of. Some are working as delivery men carrying heavy loads on their heads. They're very, very underweight, not very good health, and treated badly. Services there, not great. You can rent out a telephone, and I suppose the telephone service is good. You can rent out the phone, ring someone abroad, but again, it's very basic, like they have to go in and rent that. Email and broadband is widely available, but again, it's only available to the wealthy because they can only afford it. They've excellent underground metro if you can afford it. Bus service is frequent but poor quality, deadly old buses, heavily polluting. The trams are available. The auto rickshaws are faster than the actual rickshaws that the poor people pull. But some of the services are very poor. Electricity often fails, often get power cuts. The rubbish isn't collected for weeks, days and weeks, and it's rotting and stinking in the side of the street. So the growth of that city isn't a good example because you've got wealthy people and you've got poor people. For the poor people, they're just living in the edges of the city and it's only adding on more and more shanty towns and they're getting poorer and poorer and the richer are just getting richer. So urbanisation shows that if everyone isn't of the same standard of living, urbanisation isn't a good thing. The growth of a city isn't a good thing if you've got poor people living there. Okay, so I hope that's all right.